Imagine this. You're 24 years old. You just said yes to the love of your life. Your family is celebrating. The champagne is flowing. Laughter fills the room. And for the first time in your life, everything feels perfect. But in less than 12 hours, that perfection would be shattered. In less than a week, a hospital test would change everything. And the person responsible? It wasn't a stranger. It wasn't someone from the streets. It was someone who had been at every birthday party, every Thanksgiving dinner, every family gathering since you were born. Someone you called Uncle Joe. Someone you trusted with your life. This is the story of Mia Richardson, a young woman whose engagement night became the beginning of a nightmare she never saw coming, a nightmare that would force her to choose between silence and survival, between family loyalty and justice. What happened to her on what should have been the happiest night of her life is something no one should ever have to endure. But what she did next, that takes a different kind of courage. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The man who destroyed Mia's life wasn't a monster hiding in the shadows. He was a 400-pound man named Joseph Walker, Uncle Joe to everyone in the family, the guy who brought extra desserts to potlucks, the one who played Santa at Christmas, the uncle who everyone said had a heart of gold. But on October 7th, 2022, that illusion came crashing down. And the truth? The truth was far more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Mia Richardson grew up in a suburb outside of Charlotte, North Carolina. She was the kind of girl everyone liked. Smart, warm, the type who remembered your birthday and sent you handwritten cards. She worked as a dental assistant, had dreams of opening her own practice one day, and loved hiking on weekends with her golden retriever, Max. Her life wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and she was happy. Mia's parents divorced when she was 8, so she spent a lot of time at her grandmother's house growing up. That's where she got close to Uncle Joe, Joseph Walker, her mother's older brother. He was in his mid-40s, weighed over 400 pounds, and had been living in the basement apartment of her grandmother's house for nearly 15 years. Joe never married, never had kids. The family joked that Mia was like the daughter he never had. Joe was always around. Always. He showed up to Mia's high school graduation with flowers. He helped her move into her first apartment. When Mia got her job at the dental office, Joe was the first person she called. He wasn't just her uncle. He was her friend, her confidant, someone she thought she could trust without question. Mia met Daniel Thompson in the spring of 2021. He was a teacher at the local middle school. Thoughtful, patient, the kind of guy who opened doors and remembered what you said 3 weeks ago in a casual conversation. They fell in love fast. Within a year, Daniel proposed. It was a small, intimate moment. Just the two of them at the park where they'd had their first date. Mia said yes without hesitation. She couldn't wait to start her life with him. The engagement party was planned for October 7th. Mia's mom rented out a small event space. About 50 people showed up. Friends, co-workers, extended family, and of course, Uncle Joe. He arrived early with a chocolate cake he'd picked up from Mia's favorite bakery. He hugged her tight, told her how proud he was. Mia remembered smiling so hard her cheeks hurt. Everything felt right. Everything felt safe. The party was everything Mia had hoped for. There were toasts, music, dancing. Daniel's mom cried happy tears. Mia's best friend Hannah gave a speech that had everyone laughing and crying at the same time. And through it all, Uncle Joe sat at a corner table watching, smiling, drinking soda after soda. Always close. Always there. As the night wound down, people started to leave. Mia was exhausted but happy. She hugged her mom goodnight, thanked everyone for coming. Daniel had to leave early because he had a work obligation the next morning. He kissed her on the forehead, told her he loved her, and left. Mia stayed behind to help clean up. And that's when Uncle Joe offered to drive her home. She didn't think twice about it. Why would she? This was Uncle Joe. the man who had been part of her life since she could remember, the man who had never given her a reason to be afraid. So she said yes. She grabbed her purse, waved goodbye to the last few stragglers, and got into his car. It was just after 11 p.m. The streets were quiet. The radio played soft jazz, and Mia, tired from the long night, leaned her head against the window and closed her eyes. She had no idea what was about to happen. No idea that the next few hours would change the course of her entire life. What happened next is difficult to talk about, not because it's complicated, but because it's painful, because it's the kind of violation that doesn't just hurt the body. It destroys trust. It shatters the foundation of what you thought was safe. Mia doesn't remember all of it. That's what trauma does. It fragments memory. It protects you from the full weight of what happened by erasing pieces. But she remembers enough. She remembers Uncle Joe not driving toward her apartment. She remembers asking where they were going. She remembers his voice, calm and steady, telling her he just needed to stop by his place for a minute. She remembers feeling uneasy, but pushing it down. This was Uncle Joe. He wouldn't hurt her. She remembers going inside the basement apartment. She remembers sitting on the couch. And then, the memories blur. There's a gap, a darkness, the kind of darkness that comes from something being slipped into a drink, from something being done without consent, without the ability to fight back. When Mia woke up, it was morning. She was still on the couch, fully dressed, but something felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. Her body ached. Her mind was foggy. Uncle Joe was in the kitchen making coffee, acting like nothing had happened. He smiled at her, asked if she slept well, told her she must have been exhausted and dozed off. Mia didn't know what to say. She felt nauseous, disoriented. She grabbed her things and left without saying much. She called an Uber from the sidewalk outside. On the ride home, Mia stared out the window. She tried to piece together the night, tried to remember. But the harder she tried, the more the memories slipped away. All she had was a sick feeling in her stomach, a feeling that something terrible had happened, something she couldn't name. She spent the rest of the day in bed. She didn't tell Daniel. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't even fully understand what had happened herself. How do you report something you can't remember? How do you accuse someone of something when your own mind won't confirm it? So she stayed silent. She pushed it down, tried to move on, but the body remembers what the mind tries to forget. And within days, Mia's body started sending her signals that something was very, very wrong. 3 days after the engagement party, Mia woke up with a fever. Her throat was sore. She felt weak, dizzy. At first, she thought it was just the flu. Stress from the party, wedding planning, life. But the symptoms didn't go away. They got worse. By the end of the week, she had a rash on her chest, night sweats, fatigue so heavy she could barely get out of bed. Daniel noticed. He begged her to go to the doctor. Mia resisted at first. She didn't want to make a big deal out of what she thought was just a virus. But when the fever hit 102 degrees, she finally agreed. She made an appointment at a walk-in clinic. She thought they'd give her antibiotics and send her home. She had no idea she was about to hear 3 letters that would change her life forever. The clinic was busy that Tuesday afternoon. Mia sat in the waiting room flipping through a magazine she wasn't reading. Her name was called. She followed a nurse into a small exam room. The doctor came in a few minutes later, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a calm voice. She asked Mia about her symptoms, took her temperature, looked at the rash, and then she paused. She asked Mia a question that made her stomach drop. When was the last time you were sexually active? Mia hesitated. She thought about Daniel. They hadn't been intimate in over a week because he'd been sick with a cold. And then, she thought about that night. The night she couldn't fully remember. The night with Uncle Joe. But she couldn't say that. She didn't even fully believe it herself. So she just said, "A couple of weeks ago." The doctor nodded. She didn't push, but she did suggest running a full panel of tests, just to be safe. Blood work, a screening for common infections. Mia agreed. She rolled up her sleeve, let them take the vials of blood, and went home. She thought that would be the end of it. A few days later, she'd get a call saying everything was fine, maybe a prescription for an antibiotic. Nothing serious. But life doesn't always go the way we think it will. 2 days later, Mia's phone rang. It was the clinic. The voice on the other end was professional but serious. They needed her to come in person, as soon as possible. Mia's heart started racing. She asked if everything was okay. The voice said they just needed to discuss her results. They couldn't do it over the phone. Mia hung up and stared at the wall. She knew. Somewhere deep inside, she knew this wasn't going to be good news. She went to the clinic the next morning. Alone. Daniel was at work. She didn't want to worry him until she knew what was going on. The same doctor met her in the exam room. This time her face was different, more serious, more careful. She sat down across from Mia and took a breath. And then she said the words, "Mia, your test came back positive for HIV." The room went silent. Mia heard the words, but they didn't make sense. HIV. That was something that happened to other people. People who used needles. People who didn't know their partners. Not her. Not Mia Richardson, the dental assistant with the golden retriever and the fiancé who taught middle school. This couldn't be real. She asked the doctor to repeat it. The doctor did. Slower this time. More gently. "You've tested positive for the human immunodeficiency virus. We're going to need to run more tests to confirm, but based on your symptoms and the blood work, it's accurate." Mia's hands started shaking. Her vision blurred. She felt like the walls were closing in. She asked how. How could this happen? The doctor explained that HIV is transmitted through bodily fluids, blood, sexual contact. And given Mia's recent symptoms, it was likely a recent exposure. Acute HIV infection, meaning it happened within the last few weeks. The doctor's words echoed in Mia's head. Recent exposure, the last few weeks. And then it hit her. Like a freight train. Uncle Joe. That night. The night she couldn't remember. The night she woke up feeling wrong. That's when it happened. That's when her life was stolen from her. Mia left the clinic in a daze. She sat in her car in the parking lot and cried. Not the kind of crying where you sob and gasp for air. The quiet kind. The kind where tears just roll down your face and you don't have the energy to wipe them away. She felt dirty. Broken. Like her body had betrayed her. But worse than that, she felt alone. Because how do you tell the people you love that you're HIV positive? How do you explain that you don't even know how it happened? That the person who did this to you is someone they trust? Someone they love? Mia sat in that parking lot for over an hour. She thought about calling Daniel. She thought about calling her mom. But every time she reached for her phone, her hand froze. She wasn't ready, not yet. So instead, she drove home. She climbed into bed. And she let herself fall apart in the only place that felt safe. Alone. In the dark. With the weight of a diagnosis she never saw coming pressing down on her chest like a stone. For the next few days, Mia moved through life like a ghost. She called in sick to work. She told Daniel she had the flu and needed space to recover. He believed her. Why wouldn't he? Mia had never lied to him before. But this wasn't just a lie. This was a secret that felt too heavy to carry, but too dangerous to share. Because if she told the truth, everything would change. Her relationship, her family, her entire life. And Mia wasn't sure she was strong enough to survive that kind of explosion. It was Mia's best friend, Hannah, who finally broke through. Hannah had been calling and texting for days. When Mia didn't respond, she showed up at her apartment unannounced. She knocked on the door until Mia answered. And when Mia opened that door, Hannah knew immediately. Something was terribly wrong. She didn't ask. She just walked in, sat Mia down on the couch, and waited. and after a long silence, Mia finally spoke. She told Hannah everything. The diagnosis, the confusion, the fragmented memories of that night with Uncle Joe. And as she spoke, something shifted. Saying it out loud made it real, made it undeniable. Hannah didn't judge. She didn't panic. She just listened. And when Mia finished, Hannah looked her in the eye and said 6 words that would change everything. "You need to report this now." Mia resisted at first. She didn't want to believe it, didn't want to accept that someone she loved could do something so evil. But Hannah didn't back down. She reminded Mia that this wasn't just about her. If Uncle Joe did this to her, he could do it to someone else. Maybe he already had. Mia needed to protect herself, and she needed to protect others. That night, Hannah stayed over. They talked until 3 in the morning. And by sunrise, Mia had made a decision. She was going to the police. Not because she wanted to, but because staying silent felt like letting him win. And Mia wasn't ready to give up her life without a fight. 2 days later, Mia walked into the Charlotte Police Department. Her hands were shaking. Her voice was quiet. But she told them everything. She told them about the engagement party, about Uncle Joe offering to drive her home, about waking up the next morning with no memory of what happened, and about the HIV diagnosis that confirmed her worst fear. The detective assigned to her case was a woman named Officer Linda Hayes. She was in her early 50s with graying hair and a no-nonsense attitude. But there was kindness in her eyes. She listened to Mia's story without interruption, took notes, asked careful questions. And when Mia finished, Officer Hayes leaned forward and said something Mia would never forget. "I believe you, and we're going to figure out what happened." For the first time since the diagnosis, Mia felt a flicker of hope. Someone believed her. Someone was on her side. The investigation started quietly. Officer Hayes explained that cases like this are difficult. There were no witnesses, no physical evidence from the night in question because too much time had passed. But there was the HIV diagnosis, and there was the timeline. If they could prove that Joseph Walker knew he was HIV positive and had been living with the virus, that would be a crucial piece of the puzzle. Officer Hayes requested Mia's medical records. She also requested a warrant to access Joseph Walker's medical history. It took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of waiting. 3 weeks of Mia jumping every time her phone rang. 3 weeks of pretending everything was fine while her world was falling apart. And then, the call came. Officer Hayes had found something. Joseph Walker had tested positive for HIV 6 years earlier. He'd been receiving treatment at a clinic in Charlotte. He knew. He knew he was positive. And he never told anyone. Not his family. Not his doctors about potential exposures. No one. When Officer Hayes told Mia this, she felt sick. 6 years. He'd been living with HIV for 6 years and said nothing. How many other people had he been around? How many other opportunities had there been? The betrayal was almost too much to bear. But it also gave Mia something she desperately needed. Proof. Proof that what happened to her wasn't an accident. It was intentional. It was criminal. And it could be prosecuted. Officer Hayes brought Joseph Walker in for questioning. She didn't arrest him. Not yet. She wanted to see if he would talk. If he would slip up. Joseph arrived at the station looking calm. Almost too calm. He sat across from Officer Hayes in the interrogation room and smiled, like this was all some kind of misunderstanding. Officer Hayes started with easy questions. "Where were you on October 7th? Did you give Mia Richardson a ride home that night?" Joseph answered without hesitation. Yes, he gave her a ride. She was tired. He was being helpful, just doing what any good uncle would do. Officer Hayes nodded. She didn't show her hand yet. She asked him if he knew he was HIV positive. Joseph's smile faltered, just for a second. Then he recovered. He said yes, he knew. He'd been managing it for years. No big deal. Officer Hayes pressed. "Did you tell Mia? Did you tell anyone in your family?" Joseph shifted in his seat. He said it was private. Medical information. He didn't think it was anyone's business. Officer Hayes leaned forward. Did you have sexual contact with Mia Richardson on the night of October 7th? Joseph's face changed. The calm mask slipped. He looked angry, defensive. He said no. Absolutely not. That was ridiculous. Disgusting. How could anyone think that? Officer Hayes didn't blink. She told him that Mia had tested positive for HIV, that the timeline matched, that she had fragmented memories of that night, and that the law in North Carolina is very clear about the intentional transmission of HIV. Joseph stood up. He said he wanted a lawyer. The interview was over, but the damage was done. His reaction told Officer Hayes everything she needed to know. He was guilty, and now it was just a matter of building the case to prove it. Over the next several weeks, the investigation deepened. Officer Hayes interviewed Mia's doctors. She pulled phone records. She even spoke to other family members, carefully, without revealing the full scope of the investigation. And slowly, a picture began to form. Joseph Walker wasn't the harmless, gentle uncle everyone thought he was. He was a predator. And Mia wasn't going to let him get away with it. When word started to spread, the family exploded. Mia's mother was the first to find out. Mia sat her down one evening and told her everything. The diagnosis, the accusation, the investigation. Her mother's reaction was immediate. Disbelief. Anger. Not at Joseph. At Mia. How could you accuse your uncle of something like this? He loves you. He's been there for you your whole life. This is insane. Mia tried to explain. Tried to show her the medical records, the timeline, the evidence. But her mother didn't want to hear it. She said Mia must have gotten it from Daniel, or from someone else, anyone else, because there was no way Joe could do something like this. Mia's mother walked out of her apartment that night and didn't speak to her for 2 weeks. It was the most painful silence Mia had ever experienced. Losing her health was devastating. But losing her mother's support? That felt like losing everything. Other family members had similar reactions. Mia's grandmother refused to believe it. She said Joe was a good man, that Mia must be mistaken, confused, maybe even lying. The accusations split the family down the middle. Half of them stood by Joseph. The other half stayed quiet, unsure of what to believe. Only a few, including Mia's cousin Rachel, reached out to offer support. Rachel had always been close to Mia. When she heard what happened, she didn't hesitate. She called Mia, told her she believed her, and promised to stand by her no matter what. I know this is hard, Rachel said, but you're doing the right thing. Don't let anyone make you feel like you're not. Those words kept Mia going on the days when everything felt impossible. The community reaction was just as brutal. In a small suburb like theirs, word traveled fast. People talked, they whispered, they speculated. Some people believed Mia, others didn't, and the ones who didn't weren't shy about saying so. Mia started getting anonymous messages on social media, cruel messages, messages calling her a liar, a homewrecker, someone trying to destroy a good man's reputation for attention. She stopped going to the grocery store because she couldn't handle the stares. She stopped going to church because the judgment was too heavy. She felt like a prisoner in her own life. But through it all, Hannah never left her side. Daniel, once he finally learned the truth, stood by her too. He was devastated, hurt that she hadn't told him sooner. But he understood why, and he promised her that no matter what happened, he wasn't going anywhere. That kind of loyalty in the middle of so much betrayal was what kept Mia standing. It reminded her that not everyone in the world was cruel, that there were still people who believed in truth, in justice, in doing what's right even when it's hard. If you're still watching, type "I'm still here" in the comments, because stories like Mia's need to be heard till the end. The truth is, cases like this don't just affect the victim. They affect entire communities. They force people to choose sides. They challenge what we think we know about the people we love. And that's uncomfortable. It's easier to deny, to defend, to protect the person we've always known, rather than accept that they might be capable of something monstrous. But denial doesn't protect anyone. It just allows the harm to continue. And Mia knew that if she stayed silent, Joseph would keep hiding, keep hurting. And she couldn't let that happen. Not to her, not to anyone else. 3 months into the investigation, Officer Hayes got the breakthrough she needed. It came from an unexpected source. A nurse who had worked at the clinic where Joseph received his HIV treatment. The nurse reached out anonymously at first, through a tip line. She said she remembered Joseph Walker. She remembered him because of something he'd said during one of his appointments. He'd made a comment almost casually about not telling his family about his status, about how it was easier that way, how people didn't need to know. The nurse had flagged it in her notes at the time but hadn't thought much of it, until she saw his name in the news connected to an investigation. Officer Hayes interviewed the nurse in person. She confirmed the conversation. She provided the medical notes, and she testified that Joseph had been explicitly counseled multiple times about the importance of disclosure, especially in situations involving intimate contact. He knew the risks, he knew the law, and he chose to ignore both. This was the evidence Officer Hayes needed. It established knowledge, it established intent, and it gave the prosecution a solid foundation to move forward. But there was more. During the investigation, Officer Hayes had quietly reached out to other women in Joseph's life. Not many. Joseph didn't have a wide social circle, but there were a few. A woman he'd dated briefly 5 years ago, a former co-worker. Officer Hayes asked careful questions. Did he ever make you uncomfortable? Did anything happen that felt wrong? One woman came forward. Her name was Brenda. She was in her early 30s, worked as a cashier at a grocery store. She'd known Joseph through a community group. They'd gone out a few times. Nothing serious. But one night after dinner, Joseph had invited her back to his place. She'd agreed. And what happened next sounded eerily familiar to Mia's story. Brenda didn't have all the details. Her memory was foggy. But she remembered feeling strange, feeling like something had happened that she hadn't consented to. She'd never reported it because she didn't have proof, didn't think anyone would believe her. But when Officer Hayes reached out, Brenda agreed to get tested. The results came back negative. She'd been lucky, but her testimony still mattered. It established a pattern. It showed that Joseph had done this before, or at least tried to. Armed with this new evidence, Officer Hayes presented the case to the district attorney. The DA reviewed everything, the medical records, the timelines, the testimonies, the pattern of behavior. And in early February 2023, the decision was made. Joseph Walker would be charged with intentional transmission of HIV, a felony under North Carolina law. He would also face charges of sexual assault. The day the charges were filed, Mia got the call from Officer Hayes. She was at home, sitting on her couch with Daniel. When her phone rang and she saw Officer Hayes' name on the screen, her heart started pounding. She answered. Officer Hayes didn't waste time. "We're moving forward. He's being arrested today." Mia felt a rush of emotions all at once. Relief, fear, anger, sadness. Justice was finally within reach. But it also meant the battle was just beginning. Joseph Walker was arrested at his home. Officers showed up at the basement apartment in the middle of the afternoon. He answered the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking confused. When they read him his rights and placed him in handcuffs, he didn't resist. He just looked shocked, like he couldn't believe this was actually happening. The arrest made local news. The headline read, "Local man charged with intentional HIV transmission and sexual assault." The story didn't name Mia. Victims of sexual assault have the right to privacy, but in a small community people knew. They connected the dots. And suddenly, the tide began to turn. People who had doubted Mia started to reconsider. People who had defended Joseph started to stay quiet. Because seeing someone you know in handcuffs, being led out of their home by police, changes things. It makes the accusations feel real. It forces you to ask uncomfortable questions. And for some people in that community, it was the wake-up call they needed. Joseph posted bail. His lawyer argued that he wasn't a flight risk, that he had ties to the community, that he deserved to await trial at home. The judge agreed with conditions. Joseph was ordered to stay away from Mia. No contact, no third-party contact. He was also required to wear an ankle monitor. He was released 2 days after his arrest. And the legal battle officially began. The months that followed were brutal. Joseph's lawyer tried every angle. They argued that there was no proof of sexual contact, that Mia's memory was unreliable, that the HIV transmission could have come from somewhere else. They painted Mia as confused, vindictive, someone with a grudge. It was a common defense strategy in cases like this. Attack the victim's credibility, make the jury doubt. But Mia's legal team was ready. They had the medical records, they had the timeline, they had Brenda's testimony, they had the nurse's notes, and most importantly, they had Mia. A young woman who was willing to stand up in court and tell her story, no matter how painful, no matter how hard, because she knew that silence only protects the abuser. And she was done protecting Joseph Walker. The trial was set for September. 6 months away, 6 months of waiting, 6 months of reliving the trauma every time she met with her lawyer, every time she had to review the evidence, every time she thought about what lay ahead. But Mia didn't back down. Not once. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person who'd ever been silenced. Every person who'd ever been told they were lying. Every person who'd been betrayed by someone they trusted. Mia was going to fight. And she was going to win. The trial began on a Tuesday morning in mid-September. The courthouse was packed. Media, family members, supporters on both sides. Mia walked in with Daniel on one side and Hannah on the other. She wore a simple navy dress. Her hair was pulled back. She looked calm. But inside, her heart was racing. She'd prepared for this moment for months, but now that it was here, the weight of it felt almost unbearable. Joseph sat at the defense table with his lawyer. He'd lost weight since the arrest. His face was drawn. He didn't look at Mia when she walked in. Didn't acknowledge her at all. It was as if even now he was pretending none of this was real. The prosecution's opening statement was clear and direct. They laid out the timeline, the medical evidence, the pattern of behavior. They painted a picture of a man who knew he was HIV positive, who knew the risks, and who chose to harm someone he claimed to love, someone who trusted him. The defense's opening statement was predictable. They claimed Mia was mistaken, that the evidence was circumstantial, that Joseph Walker was a good man being destroyed by false accusations. Over the next 2 weeks, witness after witness took the stand. Mia's doctors testified about her diagnosis. Officer Hayes testified about the investigation. The nurse from the clinic testified about Joseph's knowledge of his status and his refusal to disclose. Brenda testified about her experience, even though her case hadn't resulted in transmission. Her testimony was crucial. It showed the jury that this wasn't an isolated incident. And then it was Mia's turn. She took the stand on a Thursday afternoon. The courtroom was silent. All eyes were on her. The prosecutor asked her to walk through the night of October 7th. Mia's voice was steady at first. She talked about the engagement party, about the joy she felt, about Uncle Joe offering to drive her home. But as she got to the part about waking up the next morning, her voice cracked. She paused, took a breath, and then she continued. She told the jury about the confusion, the fear, the diagnosis, the betrayal, and as she spoke, she finally looked at Joseph. He was staring at the table, refusing to meet her eyes. The defense cross-examined her. They tried to poke holes in her story, tried to suggest she'd been drinking too much, that her memory was unreliable, that she was making this up for attention, or money, or revenge. Mia didn't flinch. She answered every question calmly. honestly. And when the defense attorney asked if she had any proof that Joseph Walker had assaulted her, Mia looked him in the eye and said, "I have the virus he gave me. I have the life he destroyed. And I have the courage to stand here and tell the truth, even when people like you try to make me feel like I'm the one who did something wrong." The courtroom was silent. Even the defense attorney paused. Mia stepped down from the stand. She'd said what she needed to say, and now it was in the hands of the jury. Closing arguments came 2 days later. The prosecution reminded the jury of the evidence, the timeline, the medical records, the pattern. They asked the jury to hold Joseph Walker accountable for his actions, to believe Mia, to stand on the side of justice. The defense asked the jury to consider reasonable doubt, to remember that accusations aren't proof, to think carefully before they destroyed a man's life. The jury deliberated for 2 days, 2 long, agonizing days where Mia barely slept, barely ate. She kept replaying the trial in her mind, wondering if she'd said enough, done enough. On the 3rd day, the call came. The jury had reached a verdict. Mia, Daniel, and Hannah rushed to the courthouse. The courtroom filled quickly. The judge entered. The jury filed in. Mia held Daniel's hand so tight her knuckles turned white. The judge asked the jury foreman to read the verdict. On the charge of intentional transmission of HIV, we find the defendant, Joseph Walker, guilty. Mia exhaled. Tears streamed down her face. Not tears of joy, tears of relief, of validation, of knowing that she'd been heard, believed. The jury also found Joseph guilty on 1 count of sexual assault. The judge set a sentencing date for 6 weeks later. Joseph was taken into custody immediately. As the officers led him out of the courtroom, he finally looked at Mia. And for just a second, she saw something in his eyes. Not remorse, not guilt, just anger. Like even now he believed he was the victim. 6 weeks later, Joseph Walker was sentenced to 20 years in prison. The judge cited the severity of the crime, the breach of trust, and the lifelong impact on the victim. 20 years. It wasn't enough to undo the harm. It wasn't enough to give Mia back what she'd lost. But it was justice. And for Mia, that was enough. As she left the courthouse that day, reporters surrounded her. She didn't say much, just a few words. "I hope my story helps someone else find the courage to speak up. That's all I wanted, for people to know they're not alone." And with that, she walked away.